Hey everybody, we are live. How's everyone doing today? Um, Thank you for coming and welcome to the podcast. And um, Anyway, I had the volume up on my YouTube, and so I was getting an echo. I apologize for that. So, welcome to the podcast. It's another week of office hours. This is our fifth episode, if you can believe that. And today we're going to be covering some tips, tricks, and other troubleshooting steps. We're going to dive a little bit deeper. So, some of the stuff might be a little bit more advanced than what we've done in the past. But hopefully, you guys all get something out of it. And of course, afterwards, we will do a demo and then you can ask questions. So first things first, my name is Mark and I am the operations manager for ServerPress LLC. And I'm also the guy who came up with this crazy idea to have a weekly webcast. And that's enough about me. And on to Greg. Who are you, Greg?
Hey, I'm Greg, and you probably have talked to me in support. I handle a lot of support and take care of most of you with your issues. And that's who I am.
Okay. Um, so first things first, let's get the chat guidelines out of the way. I always put them up at the beginning. Um, First, be civil and respectful. We love it when you guys interact. You don't even have to interact about desktop server and ServerPress or WP SiteSync. Even just the interacting, like I don't know, Elton John was just in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and stuff like that. It gives us a chance to get to know each other a little bit better. So I love the interaction, but always be civil and respectful. Keep in mind that there are people behind the cameras and the keyboards here. If someone asks a question and we don't get to it fast enough, or we don't, or I may not see it actually, and you have the answer, feel free to pitch in and give the answer. This is a community effort, so feel free. And then if something gets out of hand, Greg and I do reserve the right to boot someone from the chat if the rules are not followed. We haven't had to do that yet, and I hope we never have to, but I have to put that in there. Um, Let's start out with a little bit of ServerPress news. But before I get to that, I just want to say to all the people who are bracing for the hurricane, please be safe. We have lots of friends of ServerPress that have become personal friends that are out in that area. And we just want you to be safe and be careful. And if you suddenly feel the need to drop away from watching the webcast, we understand. Your safety is super important. Um, as far as ServerPress news, we have an announcement regarding 3.9.2. We will be releasing that around the beginning of next week. It looks like a Tuesday release date. In the meantime, the release candidate is still available. We have had, I think we've had one bug report, which we've already taken care of. So it's seemed to be a really stable release. Of course, we tend to not put release candidates out there for the public until we know that it's pretty stable, but we've gotten no reports. So I'd recommend that if you feel like playing around with the new version, you go to your account section, download it, play with it, and submit a bug report if you run into any issues. Um, Ken suggests that we release it Friday at 5 p.m. What many of you
Yeah.
don't know is that we actually released 391, or was it 391 that we did?
Yeah.
We did release that Friday at 3 p.m. one time because we figured that the issues that it resolved would create fewer trouble tickets in our system by releasing it on a Friday than it would have created by releasing it. So we actually did do that once. We got lucky, but we're not going to play with fire twice. But thanks for the suggestion, Ken. Appreciate it. Um, with that, we're going to get into a little bit deeper troubleshooting and tips and tricks. And as usual, Greg is going to do the presentation, and we're going to tag team a little bit as we get further into the presentation. But I will turn it over to Greg starting now.
So last week, last week we covered a lot of the front end stuff about all the different aspects of desktop server. We wanted to cover a couple little details that we get asked about. Sometimes when someone creates an export out of desktop server and they unzip it they may notice that there are multiple database files. So let me show you one. So right here is an archive, and you might see a whole list of database SQL files. And we've been asked, why are there multiples? Why are there so many? And the reason is because Desktop Server has had issues deploying to some hosts. Some hosts, if the database is too large, it won't import. So what we do is we break it up into smaller pieces and then handle it and import those individually into the MySQL database up on the host. I should probably write a document on how to concatenate these into a single file if you should ever need to do that. There are some cases where when you're deploying a site, you might want to manually deploy the database, and rather than dealing with a multiple of databases, we could have you run a command and it would join these all together. I'll see if I can get that together and maybe put that in a link in the show notes in the future. So that's one thing I wanted to cover with you. Oh, I should mention also, while we're looking at this particular one, we talked a little bit about our Clean Import plugin and how it makes imports come in and resolve some issues. One of those issues is that the htaccess file contains a lot of code in it that's been written in by the host. That's host specific. It doesn't help when it imports into Desktop Server. So one of the things Clean Import does is it saves that htaccess file and adds a date and timestamp to it and rewrites a basic htaccess file. So that's why you might see two htaccess files in your archive, like in this case. And down here, we also do the same thing with a wp-config file. We'll go ahead and rename that wp-config file that exists to save and the date stamp and rename that there also. So that's a couple of things that you can see in an archive if you have Clean Import running and you've imported the site. Let's go ahead and reduce that down there. We also wanted to mention that sometimes when you deploy a site, when you deploy the site with Desktop Server, it deploys everything. So it deploys all the files, it deploys the plugins, it deploys the database, which now has the user in it. That user is going to be now the new user. So sometimes there can be some confusion there when you have deployed the site and you go to log in. If you think it's the user that was there prior, it's not. It's going to be the user that's part of the one that you worked on locally. So if that user is different than the one that was live and you've now deployed the site, it's now going to be the users that are in the user table that was local. You also can deploy just the database. So let's say you made some changes just to locally, you've just added maybe a post, you've added a page, you've modified some things like that. You can deploy just the database. Now, if you did add a plugin, that's a file besides just the database settings, so you'd want to deploy the entire thing. But if it's only things like writing a post, writing a page, things like that, you can do a deployment of just the database. And that's the last step. Let's see, let's see if I can demo that for you. Let's go back. Let's do export, export or deploy. And let's see, we'll just deploy. Oh, we'll do that there, that's fine. Try to remember if I have any site I can deploy to that's available to us. I may not. I don't. I apologize. I don't have one I can send to at the moment. But when you get the next step, which is direct deploy, it's going to ask you for the username and password. Go ahead and type that in and hit next. And you're going to see a little checkbox where you can choose to deploy just the database. And it's a very quick thing. If you're only deploying the database, it's very fast. Just uploads right away. Okay, so the next thing, let's talk about setting up a multi-site. In some cases, if you want to create a multi-site, you would just come to create a new development website, hit next, name it anything that you want. We'll just call this multi-site. Pick the blueprint that you want. We'll choose 498. And down here is the box that says allow multi-site network. And we're going to choose next, check that box and hit create. At this point, it's creating a folder. It's writing all the WordPress files into it. It's writing an entry into the hosts file. It's also writing an entry into our preferences file. Might take a minute or so. There we go. So after it writes the entry into the host file, it needs to restart the web and database services so that it picks up those new changes. Let's hit next. It provides you with the link. And let's go ahead and fill this out really quickly because there are a couple more steps to get the multi-site done. So let's do that. Let's just do test. And let's install WordPress. Okay, so now we'll click on login. If you have the premium version, you've got this bypass login where you don't have to type in the username or password. Just click on the user, in this case test, and log in. So at this point, it's not a multi-site. So what you need to do next is go into Tools, and you're going to see Network Setup. So click on Network Setup, and it's going to give you an option to make it a subdomain or a subdirectory. We're going to do a subdomain. It's going to ask what you want the title to be and an email address. That's fine. We're going to click install. And then it's going to ask you to make a couple of changes. So it wants you to modify the config file and the htaccess file. So the first one we're going to change is the config file. So you just copy this out. And let's go to where this is at. So it's stored in Documents Websites. And let's go to Multi-Site right there. And let's open our config file. On Windows, I use Notepad a lot, but you can use any of your favorite text editors. And then on Mac, I use Coda. So we're going to scroll down here, and just before it says, that's all, stop editing, we're going to enter in, we're going to paste in what we copied. So I'm going to save that. And let's come back. And now it wants us to replace what's in our current htaccess file with this. So we'll come back here, and we're going to open it again. And right now it has this. We're going to get rid of all of that, and we're going to paste in this here, which is for the multi-site. We're going to save that, come back here, and the moment you make this change, if you click on pretty much anything, it's going to log you out. And so you have to log back in, which we're going to do now. And you can see right up here, this little icon changes to 3 little houses, showing you that it's a multi-site. And we can see that this is set up as a multi-site. Now let's go ahead and let's say we want to add a site to the multi-site. So let's see here. I'm not going to the right thing here, sorry. There we go, sites. And we're going to add a site. And let's add Greg. So there's going to be greg.multisite.dev.cc. And to add this, now that this has been created, we need to make it so that we can visit it. And to visit it, we need to add it as an alias. So we're going to come back to Desktop Server, hit Next, and create or edit a subdomain alias. So we'll say Next. We're going to come down to Multi-Site, and now we need to click on Add. And we're going to do greg.multisite.dev.cc and say OK. There it is, and we'll say Next. And what it's going to do is write that record into the host file, and then we're going to start the web and database services again. There we go. So let's come back to our screen. And if we now come to our multi-site and we take a look at sites, we'll see we have our 2 sites here. And if we want to go ahead and visit that site, greg.multisitedev.cc now works. So we can easily get into that. We can go directly to this new subdomains dashboard and make any changes we'd like. So that's how pretty easy to set up a multi-site, not a lot to it. Try that over here. And let's see here. So that is a multi-site. The next thing, I guess, Mark, did you want to go ahead and talk about the share feature?
I'll talk about it, but apparently I'm having video problems today, so you may
Okay.
have to demonstrate it.
Okay.
The sharing feature is a really cool feature, and it is with Desktop Server Premium. There are 2 ways that you can share your site. One is on a local network only, which is obviously more secure in that only your local area network people can see it. And then there's the ngrok plugin, which allows you to share your site through a secure tunnel through the internet, so you can show it to clients, etc. The local sharing, if you are collaborating with someone within your network, that is behind the same router that you are behind, you don't need an internet connection or anything like that, and you can go ahead and you can share your site locally. Um, so, and Dave has just joined us, our partner Dave. Welcome, Dave. So, if you guys have any questions that are like advanced, Dave will be happy to answer them. You're welcome, Dave. But he just said that he likes seeing the positive feedback on the plugin features. If you have any additional feature requests, please let us know. And Dave brings up a really good point. We do always look at the feature requests. That drives a lot of what we do, because we believe in creating our software around the needs of our customers. Um, so there's that. So Greg is going to do a demonstration of how to do the local sharing really quick, and then he'll probably do a demonstration of the ngrok sharing. So let's go ahead and I'll turn it back over to Greg.
Okay, so if you have the premium version of Desktop Server, you just come down to the bottom one that says Export, Import, or Share Website and choose that. Hit Next, and then choose Share Development Website. Hit that, and then pick the site that you'd like to share. Like in this case, we could do the multi-site, and then you choose Local Area Network and click on that there. It's going to assign that IP address to this particular site. And then you can visit that with your phone. You can visit that with anybody on your same network on the 192.168.160. In this case, anybody on that network can visit this multisite.devcc by typing that IP address into their browser or into their phone. So that's how the local area network works.
And I just want to add in here, now you might run into a problem with that. Some local virus protection or local firewalls might block requests to port 80 or port 443 on another system. So if you run this feature and it doesn't work, chances are it's because of a firewall issue on that particular system. So you'll want to pay attention to that too. And then really quickly, Greg, before you show the ngrok, Goku Music has asked the question twice now, and I got a little more clarification. So he's a total beginner, and he wants to know how you change the configuration PHP file. And so maybe you can show him
The
where that
WP
is.
config file?
Well, he says the PHP file. It must be the... I wonder if he is talking about the WP config file, because you didn't really talk about the php.ini file, did you?
I wonder what he wants to change, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
So if it was the WP config file, and let me point this out also. If you're ever wondering where the sites get created, they are created when you create a new development website. They're based on the site route that you choose. So by default, Desktop Server usually puts them in Documents websites. But you can also always check what, if you create a site and you're not sure where it's located, you can go to the remove, copy, or move and hit next, and it's going to show you where the sites are located. So you always can tell, oh, it's on my C users, Greg documents, websites folders, where my rave is. So that's where you know where it is. So based on that, I can come into Internet Explorer, go to my documents, websites. Here's the multi-site one. If you're wanting to change your WP config, you could come down there. This is the configuration file for WordPress, and you can open that with any text editor. So in this case, I'm using Notepad++, and you can see what this file contains. And as I mentioned, this is the configuration file for WordPress. So things like the database name, the database user, the password, and the host are all in here, including things, if you come down a little bit lower, this is where you can actually turn on debugging if you wanted to. And because we're using a multi-site in this site, you'll see the multi-site information. You can also add additional defines to this. A lot of people like to add defines for things like you can increase the memory. You can also increase or decrease the number of revisions or turn the revisions off by adding a define inside this file in the configuration file. If there's any more questions about that, please let me know, Mark.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
So going back, just really quickly, going back to that shared site that you created.
Yes.
Did you demonstrate that if you go to that IP address, it'll bring up the website? So you have that?
I did not, because I mean, I could show it, I guess, locally on this computer.
Yeah, it'll still work. Yeah,
Okay.
just so that they can see how you would access it through a browser.
Sure. So we'll start that back up again.
So if you remember right, there was it brought up that IP address that it was sharing, and now here go. That's your router.
Yeah. What, did I not choose the right one?
Um,
I did. My router's in the way.
Your router's actually in the way. So what Greg just showed you is that his router is actually doing the translation. So what you would do is it would actually reflect the IP address of your computer. And so you would open up a web browser, and it would show, and you would type in the IP address of that computer, which desktop server will reflect. That's interesting that you ran into that. I wonder if that is your router doing that, because typically desktop server will pick up the IP address of your computer, not the IP address of your gateway, which is what that is the IP address of your gateway. So Greg is using 392. Actually, as soon as we get off this call, I'm going to be running tests on that to make sure that something didn't get that we didn't run into a bug with local sharing here. So actually, I'm glad we ran into that, and now you all got to see it. Okay, yeah, so and Andy just said local sharing is a feature he likes because it's great for testing on a range of devices. One of the main advantages of doing that is that you can test to see how your sites look on mobile and other and tablets and various formats. So local testing is really important for that, and it comes in very handy.
So let's talk about the other method, which is ngrok. So I'm going to choose stop and restart the web and database services, and let's make sure it's turned on. So ngrok, you turn on ngrok, and also DSCLI need to be on, both of those. And we're going to say restart. And ngrok is going to allow you to share out past your firewall. So you can have a client look at your work. You can have another developer or designer take a look at how the site is coming along, or if they have any questions or you have any questions for them, they can take a look at it, and you can make changes that they can see. They can even, if you add them as a user, they can even log in. If you had somebody who's a content writer, they could actually log into that local development and add content for you. So we've turned that on, and now what we want to do is go ahead and let's open up our sites. bring this over here. There are two ways to get to ngrok. One is if you go to the sites, which is your local host page, you'll notice when you hover over, you'll see a Start ngrok below that. And the other way is if you go into the dashboard, up here at the top, you'll see that little cloud that says Start ngrok. So to start it, you just click on it. And it's going to open up a terminal window in the background that you'll see like this. And it basically tells you that you have 7 hours and 59 minutes because this is the free one. And that's how long you can share it. And right now it's created this tunnel. And this is the address that you can give to whoever you'd like. And if they visit that address, they're going to go ahead and see the site. So there's our multi-site. You can see it right there. If you guys wanted to take a peek really quickly, you could probably type that into your own browsers and you'd be able to see my multi-site.
That's right. Any of you could actually put this address in right now.
Right now, you'd see it.
And see it. Now, Greg, with ngrok, with the free version, it only allows one person to view at a time, right?
I believe so. And also, it does also limit the number of connections. So those are a couple of different things. ngrok does have a paid feature, and you can sign up for. And I want to point out, let's go back into the dashboard on this. I'm in the wrong thing. Let's see. There we go. So under tools, actually, under settings is ngrok settings. And this is where if you have purchased one of their packages, you can actually come in and add the authorization key right here. And when you sign up for one of their packages, one of the other kind of neat things is you can actually have a subdomain. So rather than having that unique code like this here, where it's 557FAC19 each time, you could actually have desktopserver.ngrok.io or, dan.ngrok.io and be able to give that to somebody. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. Anytime you want to stop using ngrok, you would just close the terminal window. So we'll close that right now. And now it is basically disconnected.
And once again, Greg brought it up at the beginning when he showed this, but with ngrok to work, you absolutely have to have the DSCLI plugin enabled because it does use the terminal capabilities with DSCLI.
Yes, yes. And that brings up, that's a nice segue, Mark. We now can actually talk about DSCLI.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to click on sites and bring that back up again, a list of sites. And as I mentioned, when you hover over it, you can see that there's a DSCLI link there. And then, of course, there's also in the dashboard, there is a DSCLI up in the admin bar also. And DSCLI consists of several things. The biggest one is it contains WP-CLI. And WP-CLI is a command line language for WordPress so that you can issue commands in the command line. So if I come back to here, and let's go ahead and hover over, let's just bring up, I think which one to bring up. We'll just bring up benefit. So if you click on DSCLI, it's going to bring up a terminal window, a command line, and it's ready to go. So if I were to type in WP, which is the beginning commands for WP-CLI, it's going to present you with kind of their help, a description, a synopsis, commands that are available to you, all those kinds of things. And then you could issue those commands in here. And to learn what those commands are, you can come over to wp-cli.org, and they'll show you all kinds of examples of commands. For example, let's go up to commands here. Let's say you wanted to update all your plugins. You could come right in here and go to WP plugin, WP space plugin, and it's going to show some examples. And then down below are the subcommands. So we can actually come here and say, I want to update. Let's see, there should be an update. Let's come down here. There it is, WP plugin update.
And there are your switches right there, your
There's
options.
the switches. So let's do that right now. I'm going to go ahead and just copy this one, and I'm going to use all, -- all, and let's come back to this particular site. And let's paste that command in and do, why did that disappear? Oops, -all, and hit enter. You can see it's unpacking the update, installing the latest version, removing the old version. It's doing that for each one of the ones that required an update. There it is. So it updated there was 2 plugins that needed to be updated in this particular site, and it updated both those for us successfully. So that's how easy it is to use WP CLI. It's a great command if you're looking to do some quick changes really quickly. And WP CLI is what's written when we were sharing about the blueprints, about the dynamic blueprints. We're using WP CLI commands to issue throughout those blueprints. So you basically can create scripting that will allow you to do a series of things all at once. Mark, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about on WP CLI? Or I'm sorry, DS CLI?
Not really anything new. Just keep in mind that DSCLI includes all of the commands of WP CLI, but we've added a few things for our own purposes for things that are coming in desktop server and things that are currently in desktop server. So it's 100% WP CLI, which is why you can find all the documentation you need on CLI at what was it, wp-cli.org? Is that what the URL is, Greg?
Yes, that is correct.
And then the other thing that Ken, one of our longtime customers and biggest fans, mentioned is that he wouldn't mind seeing a complete session on DSCLI, which I think would not be a bad idea. CLI will definitely take your dev skills to the next level. And it will save you time once you get the hang of it. And it's not that hard because you have all that documentation right at your fingertips. So we might do that in a future episode.
And there are other tools in DSCLI. Composer is in there, so if you needed to use Composer, it's built in. There's a few other tools, and I'll have, when we have Steve on, we'll have him go through the tools that are in DSCLI besides WP CLI and Composer.
Mm-hmm. Now, Think Delaney asks, hi, thanks for these sessions. Stupid question about WP CLI. First of all, there's no such thing as a stupid question.
Yeah.
Of course, I had to say that, but it's true. We're all at different levels, and we all understand that. I get how this works with local server, but if I'm using on my hosting server, is it used with an SSH connection to the server?
I believe that's correct. I have never used WP CLI on a host. I'm hoping somebody in the group might have a better answer for that.
I have, and the answer is yes.
Okay.
You generally will go in through a terminal and SSH in through a terminal, and then you will issue the WP CLI. There is actually some good information on how to configure WP CLI on a live server. And I will tell you, I've only done it a couple of times, and the documentation was good enough that I got it right immediately without having to tweak anything out or spending 3 days trying to figure out what I did wrong. I haven't done it a lot since, but I will tell you that, yeah, that's how you do it, is through SSH terminal.
Cool. So I guess the next thing I'd like to cover is PHP MyAdmin. And PHP MyAdmin is a graphical user interface to MySQL. And you can access it by going, if you're on the local host page, if you go up to Tools, you can go to phpMyAdmin right here. And it's going to present basically your MySQL database and what you have in it. So over here on the left is a list of all of the databases that are existing on this particular installation. And this can be very useful to make changes if you need to within the database itself. Let's go back a little bit. I do want to show you also, besides accessing it from up here, you can access a specific database by clicking on the orange database button on the far right. So that'll actually take you into phpMyAdmin, but it takes you to that particular database. So that particular site was benefit.dev.cc, and it takes you right into it. So it shows you all of the tables that currently are in this particular installation. And if you click on one of the tables, like for example, WP options, if you click on that, it will browse that table and show you all the rows. And this is the rows containing the data. And you can see right here, we've got site URL, we've got our home URL. And these are all things that you could come in and change from within the database if you needed to. Most of these all interact with the WordPress dashboard, so you won't actually have to come in here and make changes inside here. But I do want to show you a common issue that some people have is sometimes they can't log in, especially on the limited. They can't log into their new site that they've created because they've forgotten the password or they've mistyped or many different reasons. And to take care of that, you can always come into the dashboard, into MySQL and find the WP users table. Now, I also want to point out that your tables have a prefix. In this case, it's WP underscore, but if you're importing a site, it may have a different prefix. So in this case, it's WP underscore, which is the default. But let's click on WP users to browse it. And we can see that this particular table has 2 logins that are currently in here. And the passwords are encrypted. So if you came in and you wanted to change this first one, you would click on the pencil or the edit. And it's going to show it now in rows of what this particular row contains. So this first one, the ID is 1, the user login name is Tom Mariner, and here is our user password, but it is encrypted. So if you were going to change it, you also need to set this to be encrypted. And that encryption is MD5. So you would click on the function, underneath function, click on that dropdown and choose MD5. And then type in the password as you would expect to. So we'll just type password and then hit go. And you can see it's already encrypted that. But now if you had forgotten your password, you'll now be able to log in. So it's pretty straightforward to change that. And you can find directions for this up on desktop server. Up on ServerPress. Let's see, is there anything else we want to talk about with SQL, with MySQL? I guess the other thing we should mention is you can also export the database from in here or import a database. So if you created a site and you wanted to export the database without using desktop server, you could export it right from within phpMyAdmin. Bear in mind, if you were going to export this and then use it on the host, it would still have all of the addresses, the URLs of your local name. So if it were benefit.dev.cc, it would be all of those. It would not have the one on the live site, the domain name, the URL. All right, anything else on that, Mark?
Other than Mauro Guerrillo wanted to point out that it is not pronounced MySQL, but it is MySQL, which, yeah, I say that old habits die hard. I sometimes catch myself using the two interchangeably, even though I should know better.
I do too.
But it's still pronounced GIF. I don't care what the developer says.
Instead of GIF.
GIF is a peanut butter. I don't care.
That's right.
Yeah. So.
So I think that was everything we wanted to cover today, unless you have anything else you want to cover, Mark. And if we're open to questions or anything like that.
Um, I think that is it. I think we've covered all the questions that have come in so far. Does anybody have any questions that have to do with what we showed today, or any questions that little things that you've run into with desktop server that you might have a question on? Of course, this is not a full technical support show, but we're happy to answer any questions that you might have about the operation of the software, either WP SiteSync or desktop server, and we'll try to address them here. And if it gets to be too complicated, of course, we'll try to contact you outside of the show. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them right now. And Think Delaney says he has, I assume it's a he, but it could be a she, so I shouldn't assume at all. I have an unrelated licensing question, and I'm waiting for the question to come in. Paul says, thank you for the podcasts. It helps keep him inspired to get more side work done. Well, good, Paul. I'm glad that we can help with that.
Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Yeah, and thanks for and think Delaney is a he, so I assumed properly that time. So uh, sometimes it's hard when we're in a virtual world, of course. Um, but yeah, if we can help you all in any way, even if it is just to help keep you inspired to do better and move forward with your work, we're more than happy to do that. It's one of the things that honestly I think all of us get kind of a charge out of, is knowing that we helped somebody. So that's one of the reasons we do this. So um, Think Delaney says he wants to know if he can use it also on his MacBook too.
Yes.
Our licensing is very, very generous. You buy one license and you can use it on several computers. We just ask that we have one point of contact for support. That's really the only thing that we ask. Our actual software is designed to help you with your workflow, and that's what we focus on, is just trying to help you with your workflow in any way that we can. And we recognize that having the software on more than one machine sometimes is part of your workflow. Um, so,
So I noticed Richard asked about mixed content. Um, Mixed content can be is in reflection of HTTPS or a secure website. And of course, there absolutely could be mixed content, especially if you're mapping to a link that's off-site or not within their within the local development. So absolutely, it's possible that you might get mixed content. But you can usually track that down using like developer tools and find out where that mixed content's coming in from, and then correct it.
um, Dan asks, how can WP SiteSync help us in our daily workflow? I'm going to let you answer that, Greg.
WP SiteSync is a great tool for doing surgical things. So, for example, if you were writing a post, and you wanted to work on it locally, and then you wanted to deploy it up to a target. With WP SiteSync, it's a tool that lets you push and pull posts and pages between a source and a target. So a source could be desktop server, local environment, or it could be a staging server, or it could be another live server. It doesn't matter. So you just install WP SiteSync on both the source and the target, and then you can push from that source easily the page or post that you've created. So it makes it very simple to do. There's extensions to do things like Beaver Builder and Divi, and you can push. There's a one coming for WooCommerce where you could push just the products. That way, it doesn't affect your orders. It doesn't affect reviews. When you're pushing posts and paid with posts, it won't affect the comments. So the benefits are, you can work locally with this or on your staging server and then push to a live versus working on a live server.
Okay. I think his name may be pronounced Eugen because there's no E at the end, but it might be Eugene. So I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Um, But he asks, it's along the same lines as the question you just answered. I have a question, but related to workflow. How to sync local dev with staging and later with production?
So that is, it's in the WordPress world, we like to say it depends. Everything depends. So if you were just working, let's say you're working locally on your project and you've written some posts or pages and you wanted to get those up to the live site, you could use something like WP SiteSync just to push those. But if you've done more, let's say you've changed the theme or you've added additional plugins and activated those and made setting changes, all those kinds of things are going to require pushing the entire site up again. There's currently no tool to compare. So if there was, what changes you mean locally to what you have live, that would only send those changes. And that's because we're talking about not only files, but a database. And that database may have serialized code and serialized arrays. And there may be foreign keys. And there's all these pieces that are moving all the time. And they require specific manipulation. So there's not currently a solution to compare local to live and only send that local stuff up. So most of the time, if you're writing posts and pages, you could, of course, just do it on the live site. There's not really any fear of damaging anything that way. If you are going to make changes to a theme or plugins and you wanted to test them locally first, probably recommend doing that locally first. And if everything works great, you could go ahead and do it on the live site, or you could push that change. You could go ahead and deploy the entire site back up. So it just kind of depends on how you are doing things.
Think Delaney asks about Elementor. I'm assuming he's asking with regards to if we're going to be making a plugin for WP SiteSync for Elementor.
It's on our roadmap.
Yeah, it is. And we've talked about it pretty heavily. So yes, it is in the planning stages. David Vaughn says he's in Murrieta, California. He was asking if we were in San Diego still, and I was telling him where we're all located. Craig Beeman says trying to load a newly created in Artisteer theme and got a screen full of errors regarding deprecated PHP. It was so bad I had to go out and manually delete the theme.
Okay, so there's a couple things that might be happening there. He might have debug and trace turned on.
Mm-hmm.
And if he has debug and trace turned on, go ahead and turn that off, and it's not going to show, it shouldn't show those errors. But that is pointing out that this theme has an awful lot of old code in it. So he should contact the theme developer. I think Dave mentioned that also.
Okay,
I would
yeah,
recommend.
he did. I saw afterwards that Dave actually said something, and then Craig says related to Artisteer, it's basically dead now, but they've merged with Themler. Themler runs in its own Apache and MySQL or SQL. There I go. Obviously, there's a conflict with desktop server. Any suggestions? It runs its own Apache, and that's interesting. That would conflict for sure.
Yeah, for sure. We can't have two kitchens two kitchens. We can't have two chefs in the kitchen.
That's right.
And they're going to both want port 80.
Unless we have two kitchens, in which case we could have two chefs.
So them trying to fight over port 80 would be a problem.
Yeah.
So, if it's only a theme, it's interesting that they have their own Apache and MySQL.
Yeah. I'd kind of be, for the purposes of just for the fun of it, I'd be interested in toying with that and seeing
Artisteer. Yeah, I'll have to look into that.
Yeah. Craig says debug and trace are not enabled. I'm pretty sure it's because the PHP code is actually deprecated in old code, right? And Dave brings up an interesting point. He's not sure how a theme would run its own copy of Apache, but the runtime errors make me think that you shouldn't use it. Yeah, I kind of agree with Dave on that. For one thing, unless there's an absolute reason that you'd want to use that theme because it has something that no other theme has, it sounds like they're kind of doing things in a non-standard possibly unorthodox way, and I'd be a little bit concerned about that. It's a builder, he says.
Okay, we'll have to look
So
into it.
yeah, we'll have to play with it. Craig, why don't you? And I will admit it probably won't be in our front burner, but I would like to actually look at it. So if you contact us at support, and maybe we could look at it and kind of see what it's doing, and maybe we can give you a little bit more insight there.
I wanted to mention to David Vaughn, you're out in Murrieta. If you ever get a chance, please come out to our WordPress meetup in Riverside. It's the first Tuesday of every month, and it's a great group. So come out and join us if you get a chance.
And WordCamp, and by the way, WordCamp Riverside is coming up when?
In October.
Yeah, so come on out. There is a possibility that Greg and I will be there, a very strong possibility, or
I'll
even
definitely be there.
probability. So yeah, make it a point if you haven't been to any meetups or any WordCamps. It's a great opportunity to get to know other WordPress people and get to know the community better. So definitely come. And then yeah, and we've also got Los Angeles and WordCamp Sacramento. So there's all kinds of WordCamps, they're just awesome. They're WordCamps are the reason that I got excited about WordPress in the first place. I was already like using WordPress, but then when I started going to WordCamps, that is what really got my juices flowing. I have to admit. Um, so. Um, Morrow says, just to confirm my understanding, there is no way to change default ports 80 and 443 to other ones, right?
That is correct.
Not. I have had some success with messing with the Apache configuration file, but I will tell you that it is messy, and we don't really support it. But if you know what you're doing and you want to play around with it, you can do some things. Yeah. I think Delaney says, come east of Mississippi River. I actually go to a lot of WordCamps east of the Mississippi River. Now, my geography is terrible, so I can't remember exactly what states the Mississippi separates, but I've been to several east of the Mississippi, and so is Greg. And I think next year you're going to see us at a lot more WordCamps again as we're ramping up to do the WordCamp tour again next year. So look for us there. Yep, Ken, I remember. I sat at a table with you and we talked. It was awesome. Ken says that he met us. Also, I think, Delaney, what state are you in? The reason I ask is I know that WordCamp Milwaukee is earnestly planning, and they're coming up soon. And I was in Milwaukee, and Milwaukee is a pretty awesome WordCamp. So you should go there. Also, Ann Arbor was skipped this year, um, but Ann Arbor is another wonderful WordCamp. They're going to be doing it next year. Ohio has a few WordCamps. Also, there is WordCamp Chicago. So there's all kinds. I almost always go to WordCamp Chicago. I have been to. I planned WordCamp Milwaukee 2 years ago, and I've been on the planning committee for WordCamp Milwaukee every single year. So yeah, head on up. And I'll probably be at some of them. Greg will probably be at some of them. And then if Dave and Steve can get their heads out of their code, we'll be sending them as well. And they're actually the people you want to talk to anyway, because they're really super smart. So yeah, and kitchen sink, Adam, he's like an Ohio transplant, even though he's never lived there. He goes to all the Ohio WordCamps. So if you want to meet Adam Silver in the flesh, uh, go to any of
He's a
the
very
Ohio
funny guy.
WordCamps. He is a very funny guy, uh, and hard to keep up with. So, and
Does a
by the
great
way, listen,
presentation if you
his
catch him at one of the
presentations are
WordCamps.
great. Yeah, and he has a couple of really cool podcasts, Kitchen Sink WP, of course, and the Get Options podcast that he does with Kyle Maurer is also very good. So somehow we got onto a whole conversation about WordCamps, which is cool. So And now Ken is plugging kitchen sink also. Adam has a lot of good information on that podcast. Are there any other questions? I think we're getting close to wrapping up. If not, unless you guys want to ask a personal question, like, hey, Greg, what do you do for a hobby?
Work. No, I don't have a hobby.
uh,
Actually, I love to bike and I love to hike. So
yeah.
when I'm not in front of the computer, I try to get outside.
Richard, really quickly, Richard asks if desktop server can play nicely with GitHub. Couldn't
Yes.
this be used to compare database changes?
GitHub doesn't really handle databases. It handles code. So I don't see a way that it could do that. But yes, I mean, Git, which is a software revision is a software revisioning solution, can definitely work with desktop server. I mean, they're two different things. They don't compete with each other at all. And there's actually in the dynamic blueprint, there's some code that goes ahead and creates a Git repository locally, and then it'll push up to a GitHub repository. So yes, you'll have no problem with Git.
Ashok asked how to find out about various WordCamps or Asheville WordCamp. So I just put the link there to wordcamp.org. That's where I go to get all my information and to plan out my calendar is wordcamp.org. Gives you all the latest and greatest news as to what's being planned, dates and everything. So let's see. And yeah, Dave says you need additional tools to do database compares. So I think then that I've answered all the questions. I hope I have. Sometimes the scrolling goes by fast and I miss something. So I do apologize if I missed your question. But thank you everyone for all the great interaction. This was a really good and fun episode, and I hope you all learned something. John Smith says, very good presentation. I'm pretty new to WordPress on self-hosting, made a number of them on the free platform. WordPress keeps killing them, LOL. Yeah, well, they don't say that they run 31% of the internet for nothing. So, all right. Well, one last bit of information. Next week, we're taking the week off. So we will not be having a podcast next week, but then we'll be back the following week. And as I mentioned earlier, we plan to have both Dave and Steve on an episode fairly soon to get into some of the more advanced things. So if you are advanced or want to become more advanced, you'll definitely want to tune into them because they're probably two of the smartest people that I know, and I'm lucky enough to work with them. So anyway, looking forward to it, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you once again for joining us. And we are out.
Bye.
Goodbye.